At my daughter's wedding, I overheard her whisper, "Once Mom's in a nursing home, the Miami penthouse is ours." I said nothing. I simply walked away. 3 days later, she discovered I had made one decision that would change our family forever. At her daughter's wedding, Patricia Reynolds heard a sentence no mother should ever have to hear. She was walking past the bride and groom's table with a half-empty glass of champagne when Isabella leaned toward her new husband and whispered, just loudly enough for Patricia to catch every word, "When that old lady finally ends up in a nursing home, the Miami penthouse is ours." Patricia stopped. She didn't turn around. She didn't scream. She didn't drop the glass. She simply stood there while David, the man who had married her daughter only hours earlier, gave a quiet laugh. "Probably won't be long," he said. "You keep telling me she's getting more forgetful." And that was the moment everything Patricia thought she understood about her family began to collapse. Because there is a difference between knowing your child can be selfish and realizing your child has already begun planning a future built around your decline. There is a difference between believing your daughter will inherit your home someday and hearing her speak about that home as though you are merely the obstacle standing between her and the keys. And what Patricia did next is the reason I believe this story is worth staying with until the end. She did not create a scene. She did not ruin the wedding. She quietly placed her champagne on a nearby table, picked up her purse, and walked out. But by Monday, Isabella would learn that the mother she had dismissed as an old woman waiting to be placed somewhere had begun making decisions of her own. Decisions about her money, her home, her future, and, eventually, about who truly deserved a place in the life she had spent decades building. Before we go any further, welcome to It When Family Breaks One. If stories about family, betrayal, boundaries, and the things people reveal when money enters the picture make you stop and think, subscribe to the channel. It helps support these stories and gives me a reason to keep exploring the complicated moments when families break and whether they can ever be rebuilt. What stays with me about Patricia's story is not simply the cruelty of what Isabella said, it is the setting. This happened at a wedding, a day Patricia had spent years imagining. The ballroom was glowing under warm lights. A string quartet played while guests raised crystal glasses. Isabella wore an expensive designer gown and moved through the reception like someone living inside the perfect life she had always wanted. Patricia should have been proud. In many ways, she was. This was her only child. The little girl she had raised almost entirely on her own after Robert, Patricia's husband, died of cancer when Isabella was 7. Robert's death had changed everything. Patricia had been building one kind of life before he got sick. Then suddenly she was a widow with a frightened child, bills she could not ignore, and no room to fall apart for very long. She returned to nursing and worked relentlessly. Double shifts, weekends, holidays, years when exhaustion became so normal that she barely noticed it anymore. Eventually, she worked her way into a nursing director position. But when Patricia remembered those years, she rarely thought about promotions. She remembered ballet shoes, braces, school tuition, college applications. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table late at night trying to figure out which expense could wait another month because Isabella needed something. When Isabella was accepted into an Ivy League school, Patricia refinanced their modest home to help cover tuition. Later, when Isabella wanted her first condo, Patricia helped with the down payment. She did what many loving parents do. She gave, then gave again. And every time the cost felt heavy, she repeated the same sentence to herself. That's what mothers do. I understand why that belief can feel noble, but I also think it hides a danger we do not talk about enough. Generosity can become invisible when it is constant. If someone receives enough without ever being asked to consider the cost, sacrifice can slowly begin to look like obligation. And obligation can turn into entitlement before anyone notices. Patricia never wanted Isabella to feel guilty for what she had been given, so Patricia rarely talked about what she had given up. She never told her daughter how badly she had once wanted to study art. She had even received an opportunity to attend art school when she was younger, but marriage, motherhood, Robert's illness, and eventually widowhood pushed that dream further and further away. The paintbrushes went into a closet. Life moved on. Isabella became the center of it. And perhaps that is why hearing those words at the wedding hurt so deeply. It was not simply, "She wants my apartment." The deeper wound was this. After all those years Patricia had spent protecting Isabella's future, Isabella was now discussing Patricia's future as though it were an inconvenience to be managed. On the drive home that night, Patricia replayed the conversation again and again. When that old lady ends up in a nursing home, that old lady. Not Mom, not my mother, not the woman who raised me, an old lady. And the penthouse is ours. The Miami penthouse was especially painful because it represented something Patricia had almost never allowed herself. A luxury chosen for herself. She had bought it 3 years earlier, when she was 59. It overlooked the ocean, with wide windows that filled the rooms with morning light. After decades of working and saving, Patricia finally had somewhere she could imagine growing older on her own terms. Coffee on the balcony. Books. Painting. Perhaps, if she ever found the courage to begin again. Peace. When Isabella learned that Patricia had bought it, her reaction had surprised her. "Mom, why would you spend that much on a place at your age?" Patricia had laughed. "At my age? I'm 59, but Isabella had continued. "You should be thinking about the future. You might need assisted living eventually." At the time, Patricia interpreted the comment as practical concern. That night, driving away from the wedding, the memory felt different. And this is something betrayal often does. It does not merely damage the present. It travels backward. Suddenly, old conversations are reopened. Past remarks acquire new meanings. Things you once excused begin to look like warnings. By the time Patricia reached her building, she was emotionally drained. The doorman looked at her and immediately asked if she was all right. That simple question nearly broke her. A man who barely knew her could look at her face and recognize pain. Her own daughter had watched her disappear from her wedding reception and had not followed her. When Patricia entered the penthouse, Rosa was sitting in the living room reading. Rosa had worked for Patricia for nearly 10 years, but describing her only as a housekeeper would have missed much of what their relationship had become. Rosa knew when Patricia needed her blood pressure medication. She remembered Robert's birthday. She knew which days Patricia preferred company and which days she needed silence. She had heard stories about Robert more than once and never made Patricia feel as though she was repeating herself. Most importantly, she noticed. "Miss Patricia," Rosa said, immediately putting down her book. "Why are you home so early?" Patricia tried to answer. Nothing came out. Then she cried. Not the controlled tears she had learned to hide during years of working in hospitals. She cried like someone grieving something that had not technically died but might never have existed the way she believed it did. She told Rosa what she had heard. Rosa did not tell Patricia to cut Isabella off. She did not ask what the penthouse was worth. She did not turn Patricia's heartbreak into an opportunity. She simply sat beside her and listened. That detail matters to me. Sometimes genuine care is revealed not by grand declarations, but by the absence of demands. The next morning, Patricia woke with swollen eyes and a clarity she had not felt in years. Her phone rang. Isabella. Patricia let it go to voicemail. Then came a text. "Mom, where did you disappear to? People kept asking about you." Patricia stared at the words. No, "Are you okay?" No, I was worried. Only concern about what other people had noticed. Eventually, Isabella called again, and Patricia answered. "You could have told somebody you were leaving," Isabella complained. "It was embarrassing." Patricia kept her voice calm. "I wasn't feeling well." "Anyway," Isabella continued, "we're opening the gifts this afternoon. I need you to come help keep track of who gave what so I can do the thank you cards." Patricia heard the phrasing. "I need you to come." Not, "Would you like to come?" Not, "Are you feeling better?" For years, Patricia might have automatically said yes. Instead, she surprised herself. "I can't." There was a pause. "What?" "I have plans." "With who?" Patricia looked across the kitchen at Rosa. "I'm having lunch with Rosa." "Your housekeeper?" The disbelief in Isabella's voice was almost insulting. "Mom, you can have lunch with her whenever you want." And there it was again. The ranking. Isabella's wedding mattered. Isabella's schedule mattered. Isabella's needs mattered. Everyone else could be moved around them. Patricia had helped create that pattern by accommodating it for years, but patterns survive only as long as people keep participating in them. "I made a commitment," Patricia said. "I'm keeping it." Then she ended the call. It was a very small act, But I think some of the biggest changes in a person's life begin exactly like that. Not with revenge, not with a courtroom, not with a dramatic speech, with one quiet word: no. At lunch, Rosa asked Patricia something nobody had asked her in years. "What did you used to love doing?" Patricia smiled sadly. "Painting." She told Rosa about the old supplies still packed away in a closet, about the art school dream she had abandoned, about the life that had gradually become wife, widow, nurse, provider, mother, and almost nothing else. Rosa listened. Then she asked, "And what do you want now?" Patricia opened her mouth and nearly answered with something about Isabella. Then she stopped. Rosa had not asked what she wanted for her daughter. She had asked what Patricia wanted for herself. That evening, Patricia went home and opened the closet. The brushes were still there, so were the canvases, dusty, forgotten, waiting. Then she sat at her desk and began listing her assets. The penthouse, retirement accounts, investments, insurance. Enough to live comfortably, and under her current estate plan, enough to leave Isabella a substantial inheritance. An inheritance Isabella was already talking about as though it belonged to her. Patricia looked at that list for a long time. Then she picked up the phone. Her longtime attorney, Howard Bloom, answered. "Patricia, how was the wedding?" She looked at the old paintbrush lying beside her. "Educational." There was a pause. "What happened?" Patricia took a slow breath. "Howard, I need to review my will." That night, Patricia still did not know exactly what she would change, but something more important had already changed. For decades, nearly every major decision had begun with one question. What does Isabella need? Now another question had finally appeared. What about Patricia? And before this story is over, that question will cost her relationship with her daughter almost everything. But it may also be the question that finally gives Patricia her life back. The next morning, when Howard stepped into Patricia's penthouse with his leather briefcase and the same calm expression he had worn through 2 decades of family decisions, Patricia understood that the question she had asked herself the night before, "What about my life?" was no longer philosophical. Howard had helped settle Robert's estate and guided her through difficult financial decisions after widowhood. He knew her well enough to recognize that something in her had shifted. "You look different," he said after Rosa brought coffee to the balcony. Patricia almost laughed. "Maybe I finally am." The ocean was painfully bright after a sleepless night. Howard opened a legal pad and waited. Patricia told him everything. She did not retell every sacrifice. She had spent enough of her life explaining why Isabella mattered. She told him what she had heard at the wedding, the nursing home, the penthouse, David's comment about her becoming forgetful. Then she told him something harder to admit. It wasn't just that sentence, Howard. It was how natural it sounded to them. Howard did not interrupt. "That's the part I can't get past," Patricia continued. "They weren't angry. They weren't emotional. They were discussing my future like they were talking about a closing date. I think that distinction matters. Cruel words spoken in anger can still cause enormous damage, but calculated entitlement has a different weight." Patricia was not reacting to an argument. She was reacting to the realization that Isabella and David had mentally placed her in a future where her independence was already gone. Howard finally asked the question he had come to ask. "What do you want to change?" Patricia looked at the horizon. "I don't want Isabella to remain my primary beneficiary." Howard's pen stopped. He had expected revisions. He had not expected that. "That's significant." "So was what I heard." "Do you know what you want instead?" Patricia nodded. "Most of it should go to Rosa." Howard leaned back. He did not tell her she was wrong. He also did not simply agree. And I respect that part of the story, because real loyalty is not the same as telling someone whatever they want to hear. He reminded Patricia that a major estate change involving someone who worked in her home could later be challenged. Isabella might claim Rosa had pressured her, manipulated her, or taken advantage of an older woman after a family conflict. Patricia's expression hardened. "Rosa has never asked me for a dime." "I know," Howard said. "That isn't the point. The point is making sure the decision is clearly yours." That stayed with Patricia. When families fight over money, people can become so focused on who is morally right that they forget how important clarity is. Major decisions made during conflict deserve care, documentation, and independent advice. Patricia was not creating a weapon. She was protecting her own choice. That distinction mattered deeply. Howard asked her why Rosa. Patricia answered slowly. Because she notices me. That surprised even her. Not because Rosa worked hard or because Isabella had disappointed her. Because Rosa noticed her. When I'm quiet, she asks why. When I'm tired, she knows before I say it. She remembers Robert's birthday. She reminds me about my medication. She has listened to the same stories more times than I can count, and she never makes me feel like I'm taking up too much space. Patricia looked down at her coffee. Isabella calls when she needs something. There was no anger in her voice now, only grief. Howard asked whether Patricia wanted to leave Isabella nothing. No, that answer mattered. Patricia was not trying to erase her daughter. She was trying to stop rewarding an assumption. I still want her to receive something, she said. She is my daughter, but I no longer want the structure of my estate to tell her that everything I built was always hers. That is the difference between revenge and a boundary. Revenge asks, how do I hurt you back? A boundary asks, what am I no longer willing to hand over? When Howard left, Patricia called Rosa into the living room. Rosa sat carefully on the edge of a chair, already uncomfortable because legal conversations made her nervous. Patricia told her. Rosa's face changed immediately. No, Patricia blinked. No, Miss Patricia. Please don't do that. Rosa looked almost frightened. What about Miss Isabella? She will be fine, but she is your daughter. And you are my friend. Rosa shook her head. I never wanted anything from you. I know. That money will bring trouble. I know that too. Rosa stood and began pacing. She will think I did something. She will say I came here for this. Patricia watched her. The irony was painful. Rosa feared that money might corrupt their relationship, while Isabella had already been counting what she might receive. That contrast said enough. The following afternoon, Isabella sent a message. Mom, David and I are coming by tomorrow at 7. We need to talk. Patricia stared at the screen for several seconds. Not, can we come? Not, are you free? We are coming. For years, Patricia had treated such intrusions as normal. But she was beginning to understand that love without boundaries can teach people that access is guaranteed. She replied with 2 words. 7 works. The next evening, Isabella arrived, dressed as if she were attending a business dinner. David followed her inside, walked to the bar, and poured himself scotch without asking. It bothered Patricia because she was finally noticing how much entitlement lived in small gestures. Isabella sat down and folded her hands. Mom, we're worried about you. There it was. Concern. Or something wearing concern's clothes. Patricia said nothing. You left the wedding without telling anyone. Then you refused to come to the gift opening. You've been acting strangely. I said I wasn't feeling well. David sat across from her. That's part of it, Patricia. You've seemed more unpredictable lately. More unpredictable. Another word that sounded innocent until you placed it next to forgetful. Isabella leaned forward. This place is a lot for one person. Patricia looked around her own living room. The home was clean, organized, accessible by elevator, and Rosa helped with the household. Patricia still drove, managed her accounts, and attended her own appointments. What exactly is too much? The maintenance, the responsibility, being alone. I'm not alone. You know what I mean, Patricia did. The conversation was moving toward the same destination she had overheard at the wedding. Isabella softened her voice. There are beautiful retirement communities now. Really nice places. You could choose one while you're still able to make that decision yourself. Patricia felt a chill. While you're still able. That sentence changed the temperature in the room, so Patricia stopped pretending. Like the nursing home you were discussing at your wedding? Isabella's face went blank. David froze. Patricia continued. The one you said I would end up in before the penthouse became yours. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Isabella whispered, You heard that? Yes. The words seemed to remove something from her daughter's face. Control. You misunderstood. No, we were joking. No, Mom, people say stupid things at weddings. Patricia looked directly at David. Which part was the joke? Me losing my independence, or you getting my home? David shifted in his chair. Patricia, no one is trying to take anything from you. Then why are you sitting in my living room trying to convince me I can't manage my own life? Isabella's jaw tightened. This is exactly what I mean. You're turning everything into an attack, Patricia almost answered sharply. Instead, she asked the question that had been haunting her since the wedding. When was the last time you called me just to ask how I was? Isabella stared at her, not to ask for help, money, or a favor. Just to ask. Isabella opened her mouth, then closed it. Patricia nodded. That's what I thought. The silence that followed was uglier than shouting. Finally, Isabella said, "You're making me sound like some terrible daughter after everything you chose to do for me." Chose. Patricia heard the word clearly. Yes, she said. I chose it. Parents sacrifice. That's what they do. Patricia felt something inside her settle. That doesn't mean children inherit ownership of the parent, Isabella recoiled. I never said that. You didn't have to. This is where I believe Patricia finally understood the deepest problem. For years, she had confused love with endless availability. Because Patricia rarely said no, Isabella had never learned that her mother's generosity was a choice rather than a permanent obligation. A healthy family cannot require one person to disappear so everyone else feels supported. Patricia was learning that late. But late is not the same as never. David stood. Nobody is trying to erase you, Patricia. Then Isabella's voice turned colder. We're trying to help because you're becoming paranoid. There it was. The shift. When concern failed, doubt entered. Paranoid? You heard one stupid joke and now you're accusing us of plotting against you. You're forgetting things. You're overreacting. For the first time, Patricia felt fear move beneath her anger. Not fear of losing the penthouse, but of being described as confused often enough that someone might begin to believe it. Could Isabella really try to make decisions for her? Could she turn age into evidence? Patricia did not know exactly what was legally possible, and she was wise enough not to pretend she did. But she knew this much. She needed independent guidance, not family pressure. I am not moving, Patricia said. Isabella grabbed her purse. We'll see how you feel in a year. No, Patricia replied. You'll see how I feel now. After they left, Patricia called Howard. Her decision was final. The documents would be prepared carefully, with additional steps to establish that Patricia understood exactly what she was doing and was acting voluntarily. Then, before Rosa could ask what had happened, Patricia walked into the guest room. She pulled out the old easel. That night, she painted badly. The horizon was crooked. The clouds resembled bruises, and Patricia loved it, because for once, the value was not in whether the painting pleased anyone else. It existed because she wanted to make it. 2 days later, Isabella returned alone. Her voice was softer. Her eyes looked tired. I've been thinking, she said. Patricia wanted to believe her. That was the dangerous part. Hope survives things that logic does not. Isabella sat beside her and said she wanted to spend more time together. Maybe organize Robert's belongings. Maybe help around the apartment. For a moment, Patricia felt the mother in her reach toward forgiveness. Then the doorbell rang. Howard entered carrying a folder. I have the updated will and power of attorney documents we discussed. Isabella turned. What updated will? The softness disappeared. She grabbed the folder before Patricia could stop her and scanned the pages. Her face changed. You're leaving most of this to Rosa? Patricia took the papers back. Yes. Your housekeeper? My friend. She manipulated you. No. She's been waiting for this. No. You would choose her over your own daughter? Patricia looked at Isabella for a long time. Then she finally found the words. I'm not choosing Rosa over you. Her voice was quiet. I'm choosing myself. And I think that is the sentence that defines Patricia more than anything she ever put in a will. She was saying that loving her daughter would no longer require surrender. Isabella stared at her, as though she no longer recognized the woman sitting in front of her. Perhaps she didn't. For most of Isabella's life, Patricia had been mother first and person second. Now Patricia was insisting on being both. And Isabella was about to show just how far she was willing to go to stop that from happening. The words, I'm choosing myself, did not end the conflict between Patricia and Isabella. They simply revealed what the conflict had really been about all along. In the days that followed, Patricia expected anger. What she did not expect was silence. Isabella stopped calling. No texts, no demands, no sudden visits. For the first few mornings, Patricia kept checking her phone. Each time the screen remained empty, she felt two emotions at once: relief and grief. Relief because the pressure had stopped. Grief because the person applying that pressure was still her daughter. That is one of the hardest truths about family boundaries. A boundary does not erase attachment. You can know someone is hurting you and still miss them. You can protect yourself and still wish the phone would ring. Howard encouraged Patricia to take additional precautions around her estate decisions. Not because he believed she was confused, and not because he thought Isabella's accusations had merit, but because conflict had now become predictable. Patricia met independently with a physician who documented that she was mentally clear, understood her finances, understood the consequences of changing her estate plan, and was acting voluntarily. What Patricia did belonged to her circumstances, not to a universal legal formula. The useful principle was simpler. When someone may later challenge your ability to make choices, clarity matters. Patricia signed the revised documents. Then she put them away. And for the first time, she tried to stop making Isabella the center of every thought. She returned to painting. At first, she was embarrassed by how rusty she felt. But after a few days, the point was no longer to be good. The point was to belong to herself for a few uninterrupted hours. She joined an art class near the water, had lunch with neighbors she had barely known, and volunteered occasionally at her old hospital. None of it was dramatic. That was exactly why it mattered. After a life organized around emergencies and other people's needs, ordinary pleasure felt almost radical. Still, Isabella's absence remained in the room. Patricia missed her. More accurately, she missed several versions of her. The little girl who crawled into bed after nightmares. The teenager who once called from school just to share good news. The young woman who hugged Patricia after graduation. And Patricia missed the daughter she still hoped Isabella might become. Sometimes we do not only grieve the relationship we lost, we grieve the relationship we kept waiting for. A month passed before Isabella finally called. Her voice was different, quieter. "Mom, can we meet?" Patricia almost said no. Instead, they chose a small cafe near the beach, neutral ground. When Patricia arrived, Isabella was already there wearing jeans and a plain blouse instead of the polished designer clothes she usually preferred. She looked tired. "Thank you for coming," Isabella said. Patricia sat across from her. "You're still my daughter." Isabella lowered her eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said." Patricia waited. "About how I treated you. About the wedding. About the way I've acted for a long time." For one dangerous second, hope rose in Patricia's chest. Isabella continued. "I was wrong." It was the apology Patricia had wanted. But Patricia had learned enough in the previous weeks not to confuse the sound of accountability with the proof of it. "What changed?" she asked. Isabella sighed. "David and I have been fighting." She admitted she had started noticing things about him that made her uncomfortable. The way he talked about his own parents. The way he measured people by status. The way almost every conversation about family eventually became a conversation about money. "And I started wondering if I've become like that too." Patricia studied her daughter. It was more self-awareness than Isabella had shown in years. "I'm glad you're thinking about it," Patricia said. Isabella reached across the table. "I miss you." Patricia almost took her hand. But affection is not the same thing as restored trust. "I miss you too." Isabella's eyes filled. "Then can we fix this?" "I hope so." Patricia paused. "But fixing it is not one conversation." Isabella's expression tightened slightly. "I'm here trying. I know, and I appreciate that. But trust is not repaired because the person who broke it feels ready to move on." That sentence hurt Isabella. Patricia could see it. But I think it was one of the healthiest things she had ever said to her daughter. Real reconciliation is not a shortcut around consequences. It is a long pattern of behavior that makes safety possible again. They finished the conversation calmly. Before leaving, Isabella invited Patricia to dinner the following Saturday. "Just us," she said. "A fresh start," Patricia agreed. And this is where the story becomes especially painful, because Isabella did almost everything right that night. The table was set with Patricia's favorite china. Isabella had cooked dishes she loved, asked about the art class, and actually listened. After dinner, she brought out an old family photo album. For nearly an hour, they looked through photographs Patricia had not seen in years. Robert holding Isabella on his shoulders. Isabella covered in sand at the beach, a Christmas morning when they were still a family of 3. At one photograph, Isabella became quiet. "You gave up so much after Dad died." Patricia felt tears burn behind her eyes. "I did what I thought I had to. I never really understood that." Patricia looked at her daughter. For the first time since the wedding, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps something real was happening. Maybe humiliation had broken through Isabella's defensiveness. Maybe losing easy access to her mother had forced her to look inward. Maybe this was the beginning. After dessert, Isabella poured 2 small glasses of port. "To new beginnings," she said. Patricia raised her glass. "To new beginnings." Then Isabella put hers down. "Mom, there's something I wanted to ask." Patricia felt her body tense before her mind knew why. "I know I hurt you," Isabella began, "and I know I've been selfish. But if we're really working on this relationship, have you thought about changing the will back?" The room seemed to grow quieter. Patricia stared at her. There it was, not 5 minutes after the toast. The money. Isabella saw her expression. "No, Mom, that's not why I invited you." "Then why ask tonight?" "Because this affects me too. The relationship affects you. The inheritance is mine." Isabella's face changed. "I'm your daughter." "Yes. So I'm supposed to just accept that Rosa gets almost everything?" "Rosa is not the subject of this conversation. She's getting what should have been mine." Patricia set down her glass. "What should have been yours?" "My inheritance," that word again. "Not your decision, not your estate. My inheritance." Patricia felt more tired than angry. "You keep talking about something I earned as though I stole it from you." Isabella stood. "This is ridiculous. She works for you. And she has treated me with respect. So now respect has a price? No. Entitlement has a consequence." Isabella's face hardened. Patricia saw the same expression that had appeared when Howard first brought the documents. The softness was gone. Manipulation can borrow the language of reconciliation. It can say the right things and even produce real emotion. But when the hidden goal is control, sincerity eventually collapses under pressure. Patricia gathered her purse. "Where are you going?" "Home." "Mom, don't do this. I'm not doing anything to you." Patricia looked at the photo album still open on the table. "The saddest part is, if you had spent the next year rebuilding our relationship without mentioning money, I might have reconsidered some things on my own." Isabella's face fell. "But you couldn't separate loving me from what you thought loving me should get you." Patricia left. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from a law firm she did not recognize. This time, Isabella was not asking for another dinner. She was challenging Patricia's mental capacity and seeking temporary guardianship over aspects of her affairs. The allegations were brutal. Early cognitive decline, paranoia, susceptibility to influence, irrational financial behavior, manipulation by household staff. Patricia read the pages twice. Her hands shook. This was no longer about who received the penthouse someday. It was about whether Patricia should be trusted to control her life today. And that is where the story crosses a line that matters deeply to me. Disagreeing with an older parent is one thing. Believing their age gives you the right to override their choices is something else entirely. Patricia called Howard. He listened carefully. "We have documentation supporting your competence," he reminded her. "Do not panic. We'll respond through the proper process." Patricia knew he was right. But fear does not disappear simply because someone tells you the facts are on your side. That night, she lay awake imagining strangers discussing whether she was capable of managing the life she had built from nothing. For decades, she had made decisions for hospital staff, patients, budgets, employees, and a child. Now her daughter was arguing that changing a will proved she could no longer make decisions for herself. The betrayal felt different from the wedding. At the wedding, Isabella had treated Patricia's future absence as an opportunity. Now she was trying to make Patricia absent while she was still standing there. Morning came slowly. Patricia made coffee and walked onto the balcony, exhausted but determined not to let fear make her reckless. Then the doorbell rang. Rosa opened the door. David stood outside alone. He looked like he had not slept either. "Patricia," he said. "Isabella doesn't know I'm here." Patricia stared at him. Then why are you? David glanced toward the living room. Because this has gone too far, he hesitated. And because there's something Isabella told me about your family that I think you need to know. For the first time since the legal papers arrived, Patricia felt something stronger than fear. She felt suspicion. Because whatever David was about to reveal, he looked less like a son-in-law protecting his wife and more like a man who had just discovered that the marriage he entered was built on a lie. David's warning at Patricia's door had already suggested that Isabella's fight was no longer only about the penthouse, but Patricia was about to discover that the greed she feared had been built on something even more fragile, a lie about who their family had ever been. Patricia let David inside, but she did not offer him the easy warmth she once might have. He stood near the windows overlooking the ocean, restless, rubbing one hand across the back of his neck. For the first time since the wedding, he did not look polished or confident. He looked embarrassed. I told Isabella not to file that petition, he said. I told her it was wrong. Patricia folded her arms. And yet here we are. I know. David looked toward the floor. I'm not here to pretend I'm innocent in all this. That caught Patricia's attention. People usually confess when they want forgiveness. David sounded like a man who had already accepted that forgiveness might not be available. I knew Isabella came from money when we met, he continued. Or at least I thought she did. Patricia stared at him. David swallowed. I'm not proud of this, Patricia, but it mattered to me. There was no graceful way to say it. Part of his attraction to Isabella had been connected to the life he believed she represented. Wealth, property, prestige, a family with resources, a future already secured. Patricia felt disgust, but not surprise. At least David was finally saying the quiet part aloud. I married your daughter because I loved parts of her, he said. But I'd be lying if I said her background didn't influence me. Patricia gave a small, humorless laugh. So you married the inheritance too, David flinched. I suppose I thought I did. I think this is where it would be easy to turn David into a suddenly redeemed man, but that would make the story less honest. David was still the man who laughed when Isabella spoke about Patricia entering a nursing home. He had still helped treat Patricia's age as an inconvenience. He had still benefited from the fantasy that her assets might one day become theirs. Drawing one moral line did not erase the others he had crossed. But people can be selfish and still recognize when something has gone too far. And that was what had happened. The guardianship thing changed it for me, David said. Talking about inheritance was ugly. I know that now. But trying to say you can't manage your own life because you changed your will? I told her I wouldn't support it. Patricia studied him carefully. And she listened? No. He almost laughed. She said I didn't understand what was at stake. What exactly did she think was at stake? David hesitated. Then came the sentence he had apparently arrived to deliver. She said the penthouse wasn't even the biggest part. Patricia frowned. What does that mean? She told me you own land in Colorado. Patricia stared at him. Colorado? Family property. She said it had been passed down for generations. She made it sound like it was worth a fortune. For several seconds, Patricia said nothing. Then she almost smiled. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes a lie becomes so large that disbelief is the only reaction left. I don't own land in Colorado. David's expression changed. She said your family had old money. My family had bills, he blinked. Patricia sat down. My husband was a high school teacher. I was a nurse. There was no trust fund, no family estate, no hidden land. David looked genuinely confused. But the penthouse, I bought it. The investments? I earned them, she paused. After Robert died, I worked 60-hour weeks for years. I saved. I invested carefully. I moved into administration. That is where the money came from. David sat opposite her slowly. The story he had believed was collapsing in real time. She told me you came from wealth. No. She said your family had always been comfortable. We were ordinary people. Patricia watched something painful happen on his face. Not heartbreak exactly. Recognition. His marriage had been built partly on an image Isabella created, and the image was beginning to dissolve. She lied to me. Patricia did not comfort him. Yes, David lowered his head into his hands. For the first time, Patricia understood another dimension of Isabella's behavior. The money mattered. but beneath the money was shame. Isabella had spent years trying to distance herself from the life she came from. A nurse for a mother, a teacher for a father, a modest house, years of careful budgeting. To Patricia, those things represented endurance. To Isabella, they seemed to represent something she needed to escape. And this is one of the saddest forms of entitlement I have seen in family stories. Sometimes people do not want wealth because they are hungry. They want wealth because they are ashamed of appearing ordinary. They begin using money as proof that they matter. Then eventually, anyone who threatens that image becomes a problem to manage. Patricia suddenly saw the penthouse differently. Perhaps Isabella had not simply wanted the property. Perhaps she had needed it to confirm the identity she had been selling to everyone else. Wealthy family, successful daughter, prestigious life. Everything curated, everything elevated, everything except the truth. David looked up. She told me things about you that weren't true. I'm beginning to understand that. She made it sound like you were sitting on some family fortune and just refusing to help her. Patricia felt anger rise, but it was quieter now. She had a good education. I helped her buy a home. I helped when she asked. Apparently, that became evidence that there must always be more. David looked ashamed. I believed her. You wanted to. He did not argue. That mattered too. Sometimes manipulation succeeds because the lie tells us something we already want to believe. David wanted Isabella to come from wealth. Isabella wanted David to see her that way. They had given each other a fantasy. The problem was that Patricia's life had become collateral damage in maintaining it. David stood. I'm calling my attorney. Patricia looked at him. And? I'm withdrawing any support for what Isabella is doing. He paused. Then I need to decide what I'm doing about my marriage. Patricia felt no satisfaction. She had once thought seeing Isabella face consequences might make the pain feel balanced. It didn't. This was still her child, still the little girl whose hand she had held through Robert's funeral. Consequences do not become pleasant simply because they are deserved. They are still losses. After David left, Patricia sat alone on the balcony. For once, she did not ask herself what would happen to Isabella and David. That was their marriage, their choices, their reckoning. Patricia had spent too much of her life believing every crisis in Isabella's world was somehow hers to solve. This one was not. 2 weeks later, Howard called. The petition challenging Patricia's ability to control her affairs had failed. The available evaluations supported her competence, and the claims against her had not established a sufficient basis to remove her decision-making authority. Howard told her the matter had been dismissed. Patricia closed her eyes. She expected triumph. Instead, she felt relief. Deep, physical relief. Is it over? She asked. For now, yes. Patricia stood beside the window and looked at the home that had caused so much conflict. What mattered suddenly had nothing to do with its market value. The important thing was that she was standing there because she chose to. Her life still belonged to her. That was the real victory. Not that Isabella lost. Not that Patricia had defeated her daughter, but that disagreement had not become ownership. Age had not become permission. Family ties had not erased autonomy. A few days later, Rosa asked to speak with her. I think maybe I should leave. Patricia stared at her. What? All this trouble. Miss Isabella thinks I am the reason. You are not. But maybe if I work somewhere else, things calm down. Patricia felt unexpectedly angry, not at Rosa. At the fact that Isabella's choices had made Rosa feel guilty for simply being kind. No, Rosa looked surprised. I don't want your money, Miss Patricia. I know. I never did. That is exactly why this hurts you so much. Rosa's eyes filled. Patricia reached across the table. You are not responsible for Isabella's decisions, and I am not going to remove someone trustworthy from my life just because someone else resents that trust. That moment completed a contrast Patricia had been slow to understand. Rosa wanted to walk away from money to protect Patricia. Isabella had been willing to attack Patricia's independence to protect access to money. Weeks passed before Isabella called again. When she did, her voice sounded smaller. David filed for divorce. Patricia did not celebrate. I'm sorry. Isabella gave a bitter laugh. Are you? Yes. The answer was immediate. You're my daughter. I don't enjoy seeing you suffer. They met at the same cafe near the beach. Isabella looked thinner. There were dark circles beneath her eyes. For once, she did not begin with blame. "He says I lied about you." Patricia waited. "I did." The words were almost inaudible. "I told him we came from money. I told people Dad's family had property. I made things up." "Why?" Isabella stared into her coffee. "Because I didn't want to be ordinary." There it was. Not a legal strategy, not an excuse. The wound beneath the behavior. "I hated saying my mother was a nurse and my father was a teacher." Patricia felt something crack inside her. Those professions had been sources of pride. Isabella had experienced them as embarrassment. "I wanted people to think I came from something bigger," Isabella whispered. "You did." Isabella looked up. "You came from people who worked." The words landed harder than Patricia expected. Isabella began crying. "I know that now." Patricia did not rush to rescue her from the discomfort. Some realizations need room to hurt. "I've been lying for so long," Isabella said. "I don't know where the truth ends anymore." Then she took a breath. "I'm not fighting your will." Patricia said nothing. "You were right. I kept calling it my inheritance like I had already earned it." Her voice broke. "I haven't earned your legacy." That word changed everything. Not inheritance, legacy. Patricia finally reached across the table, not to erase what had happened, not to promise money, just to take her daughter's hand. "The door is still open," she said, "but not to the old relationship." Isabella nodded through tears. "What does that mean?" "It means if you want me in your life, you come honestly. No money, no pressure, no pretending. And if I can't, then we keep our distance." Patricia's voice was gentle, but firm, because love without limits had nearly cost her control of her own life. She would not make that mistake again. And maybe that was the first truly useful thing Patricia could offer Isabella now. Not another rescue, not another check. A chance to discover whether their relationship could survive after entitlement was finally removed from it. Once entitlement was removed from the center of their relationship, Patricia and Isabella discovered that rebuilding a family was much harder than fighting over money, because now there was nothing left to hide behind except the truth. 6 months later, Patricia stood in a small community gallery near the water and stared at a red dot beneath one of her paintings. It meant the painting had sold. The piece was a seascape, a quiet view of the Atlantic just before sunset. The sky was streaked with gold and gray, and the waves seemed almost too calm for the woman who had painted them. Patricia had expected to feel embarrassed seeing her work beside pieces created by people who had been painting for years. Instead, she felt pride. Not the kind she had felt at Isabella's graduation or wedding. Not pride in someone else's achievement. This belonged entirely to her. The price was modest. Financially, it changed nothing. But the sale mattered because somebody had looked at something Patricia created for no practical reason and decided it had value. For most of her adult life, Patricia had measured her worth by usefulness. She was useful to patients, hospital staff, a household, and a daughter who always seemed to need something next. Painting asked something different. It asked her to pay attention, to color, to shadow, to memory, to herself. That difference had begun changing her in ways no legal victory ever could. Rosa stood beside her and tilted her head toward the painting. Robert would have liked this one, Patricia smiled. He would have said the clouds were too dramatic, and then he would have bought it. They laughed. That evening, when she and Rosa returned to the penthouse, Patricia found a message from Isabella asking if Sunday dinner was still on. Patricia read it, checked her calendar, and replied yes. Years earlier, Patricia would have rearranged her day before Isabella even finished asking. Now she considered her own schedule first, not to punish her daughter, but to remember that her time belonged to her too. Their relationship had become quieter during those 6 months. Isabella had moved into a smaller apartment after the divorce proceedings began. She had left the job she once loved mentioning at dinner parties and accepted a position that carried less prestige but gave her work she found more meaningful. She had also started therapy. Patricia never asked what was discussed there. She had spent too many years believing that being a mother gave her responsibility for every private corner of Isabella's life. Now she understood that some work had to belong to Isabella alone. And Isabella was not transformed overnight. I think that matters. Isabella still became defensive when embarrassed. She still interrupted sometimes. On bad days, Patricia could hear the old entitlement returning to her voice. But something new happened afterward. Isabella noticed. Once, while they were having coffee, she complained about an unexpected expense and began saying, "I don't know how I'm supposed to handle all of this by myself." Patricia felt the old reflex immediately. How much does she need? Then Isabella stopped. "No," she said, almost to herself. "That sounded like I was asking you to fix it." Patricia said nothing. "I'm not. I just needed to complain." That moment was worth more to Patricia than any dramatic apology. Real growth is often small enough to miss. Catching yourself before repeating an old pattern and saying, "I was wrong," without adding an excuse. Patricia was changing too. When Isabella mentioned money problems, Patricia learned to listen without reaching for her checkbook. Sometimes she offered advice. Sometimes she said nothing. Once she simply told her, "You'll figure it out." The sentence made Patricia uncomfortable because for decades she had confused rescuing with loving. Now, both women were learning that care can also mean trusting someone to carry the consequences of her own choices. Sunday dinners gradually became part of their rhythm. Not every Sunday. That mattered too. Neither pretended they were returning to the relationship they had before the wedding. That relationship had depended on too many unspoken assumptions. Instead, they were building another one. Sometimes they met at the penthouse, sometimes elsewhere, and they talked first about ordinary things: work, painting, books, Robert. Then one evening, Isabella brought up the wedding. "I keep hearing myself say it," she admitted. Patricia knew what she meant. "The worst part is that I didn't even think of it as cruel when I said it." Patricia stayed quiet. "I had already started thinking of your apartment as something that would eventually become mine." "Yes," Patricia said. Isabella winced. "That sounds horrible." "Some things need to sound horrible before we stop pretending they're normal." Isabella nodded. Patricia let her daughter sit with the truth without turning it into a permanent sentence. To me, that is one of the hardest balances in damaged families. Accountability without humiliation, compassion without denial, forgiveness without amnesia. Patricia eventually explained the boundaries she needed if their relationship was going to continue. No assumptions about her money. No conversations about where she should live unless she asked for input. No discussing her health behind her back. No using age as proof that she was incapable. If Isabella was genuinely worried, she could speak directly and respectfully. Isabella did not love every boundary, but she began respecting them. And slowly, something surprising happened. The boundaries did not make their relationship colder. They made affection safer. Patricia no longer had to wonder whether every invitation contained a financial motive. Isabella no longer had to perform closeness in exchange for access to something. They could simply have dinner. Rosa remained part of Patricia's life, and Patricia's estate plan remained unchanged. The penthouse was still intended to go to Rosa someday. She rarely discussed it because she no longer wanted her home to become the most important character in her family story. For years, everyone had focused on what would happen when Patricia was gone. Patricia finally became interested in a better question. What would she do while she was still here? She painted, traveled briefly with women from her art class, volunteered at the hospital without turning it into another obligation, and learned to enjoy solitude. After decades of postponing herself, small choices felt like declarations. One evening, Patricia and Rosa sat outside while the sunset turned the water copper and gold. Rosa mentioned that Isabella had called while Patricia was at class. She asked if she can bring dessert Sunday. Patricia smiled. "Tell her yes." Then she looked toward the horizon and thought about the word legacy. For most of her life, Patricia had believed legacy was material. A home, savings, tuition, security. Things a parent accumulated so a child would struggle less. But inheritance and legacy were not the same thing. Inheritance was what someone received. Legacy was what remained inside them after you were no longer there to explain yourself. Patricia had spent years trying to leave Isabella comfort. Now she hoped to leave her something harder. The understanding that love does not create ownership. That family does not erase another person's dignity. That aging does not cancel adulthood. That an apology is only the beginning of change. That consequences can teach what rescue sometimes prevents a person from learning. And perhaps most importantly, Patricia wanted Isabella to stop being ashamed of where she came from. Robert had been a teacher. Patricia had been a nurse. They had lived carefully. They had worked. They had lost things. They had built things. There was nothing embarrassing about an ordinary life lived with integrity. Isabella had spent years inventing a richer family because she believed status could make her more valuable. Patricia now understood something she wished she had taught sooner. Worth cannot be inherited. It cannot be purchased with a better address. It cannot be proved by convincing strangers that your parents were wealthier than they were. It has to be built through the way you live when nobody is impressed. That is what stays with me about Patricia. Not the will, not the penthouse, not even the fight over her independence. What stays with me is the fact that she eventually stopped treating self-respect as a betrayal of motherhood. She still loved Isabella. She still worried about her. She still wanted her to become a better woman. But love no longer meant surrender. Forgiveness no longer meant restoring unlimited access. And hope no longer required pretending that trust had healed before it actually had. For the first time, Patricia no longer mistook peace for the absence of family. Their relationship remained unfinished. Perhaps every real relationship does. There would be difficult conversations ahead. There would probably be disappointments. There might also be birthdays, quiet dinners, better apologies, and moments neither woman could predict. Patricia no longer needed guarantees. Today was enough. Her home was hers. Her decisions were hers. Her time was hers. And beside the window, another unfinished canvas waited. For decades, Patricia believed being a good mother meant giving her daughter everything she possibly could. In the end, perhaps the most important thing she could give Isabella was not property at all. It was the example of a woman who could love deeply without disappearing, forgive without forgetting what she had learned, and begin again without asking permission. So I want to leave you with the question Patricia's story leaves with me. If your adult child began treating your home, your savings, or even your future as though those things already belonged to them, would you give them another chance before changing everything, or would that loss of respect permanently change the relationship? And where do you believe a parent's responsibility to an adult child should end? Share your thoughts if you have ever had to love someone while also setting a boundary they did not want to accept. Because sometimes the most meaningful legacy we leave a family is not what they receive after we die. Sometimes it is what they learn from watching us finally choose how to live. Kate, final reflection and life lesson. What Patricia's story ultimately leaves behind is not a lesson about how to punish an ungrateful child. And it is not really about a penthouse, a will, or even an inheritance. Those things created the conflict, but they were never the deepest issue. The deeper issue was what happens when love slowly loses its boundaries. Patricia spent decades believing that being a good mother meant making herself available, useful, generous, and dependable no matter the cost. She gave Isabella opportunities, financial support, emotional security, and countless pieces of her own time. None of those choices were wrong by themselves. The problem came when giving became so normal that both mother and daughter stopped recognizing it as a choice. For Isabella, generosity gradually began to feel like entitlement. For Patricia, sacrifice gradually became identity. That is why the most important transformation in this story happened long before the legal conflict was resolved. It happened when Patricia finally understood that saying no to her daughter did not mean she had stopped loving her. There is a lesson here that I think reaches far beyond money. Love should not require us to surrender our dignity in order to prove that we care. Being a parent does not mean becoming financially responsible for every decision an adult child makes. Being older does not mean surrendering control simply because younger relatives believe they know what is best. And forgiveness does not require returning a person immediately to the same level of trust they had before they hurt us. Sometimes love means helping. Sometimes love means listening. And sometimes love means allowing another adult to experience the consequences of their own choices. If there is something practical we can take from Patricia's experience, it is this. Do not wait until resentment has accumulated for years before establishing boundaries. Talk openly about expectations. Do not allow family members to treat future inheritances as money they already own. Keep important financial and personal decisions clear and intentional. Seek qualified professional guidance when significant legal, medical, or financial matters are involved rather than making major decisions based only on anger or fear. And perhaps most importantly, continue building a life that belongs to you. Your children can be deeply important without becoming your entire identity. Your family can matter without controlling every decision. Your age does not make your dreams less legitimate. Patricia returned to painting not because it solved her family problems, but because it reminded her that there was still a person underneath all the roles she had spent decades performing. Maybe that is the strongest lesson of all. A healthy boundary is not a wall built to punish someone. It is a line that protects enough dignity for love to have a chance of surviving. So I would like to ask you one simple question. If you were in Patricia's position, would you have changed your will after hearing what Isabella said, or would you have given her another chance first? Please share your answer in the comments. I would genuinely like to read your perspective, and your experiences may also help other people looking at a difficult family situation from a different point of view. And if this story gave you something to think about, please subscribe to it When Family Breaks One. Your support helps this channel continue bringing you more stories about family, difficult choices, broken trust, boundaries, and the possibility of rebuilding something better afterward.